is Kickle, and it's time for another episode of American Reef. Today we're going to take a look at a unique way of setting up a quarantine system. So if I'm a new hobbyist, the first thing I'm asking myself is, what's a quarantine system and why do I need it? In general, let's cover the whys. The main reason why you need it is to protect your investment. It's the investment of your main display tank that you've set up, right? So you don't contaminate it and cause it to crash, as well as you protect your investment of the living organism that you purchased. So basically, again, it's not dying either. And the idea behind, what an organism is literally anything with water, right? If it has water and it touches it, you should quarantine it before you put it into your main display tank. That's coral, that's inverts, that's fish, it's anything, right? Now, again, what is a quarantine system? Normally what it is it's kind of a 10 or 20 gallon fish tank that is not hooked up to your main display in any way, shape, or form. And from there, basically, you'll kind of have a sponge filter inside of it, as well as maybe a light in it. Right? With that in mind, that quarantine system, you'll put that living organism and it'll give you a chance to basically study it to make sure it doesn't have any parasites or anything like that or any kind of illness on it before you put it in the tank. And if it does, well, then it gives you the opportunity to actually make that or treat that organism to make it better, right? To heal it. In my particular case, for example, I'm big on HPD, so what I do is I have a separate quarantine tank that I will take and get my fish used to eating the HPD. So I'll take whatever food they are used to, I'll blend it in with my HPD, and then from there I'll let them eat at it, and they're not fighting it for it with the other fish because it's just themselves. Now my quarantine system is a little bit different, meaning I use basically a nano display with live rock and things of that nature. And the reason why that's not necessarily a good idea is because basically the parasites and things like that will actually get buried into kind of the live rock, and there's places for those to basically survive, right? And we don't want that, right? But regardless, in my particular case, my main use for that quarantine system is basically to get, we'll say, small fish, make them bigger, put them into my main display tank. For example, my tang tank. Well, that tang tank's been around for a while, and I've got fairly large tanks. And so what I'll do is, when a tang jumps out, for example, I'll take and buy a little tang for $25-$30, put it in basically my quarantine system, and then I'll just feed it for 6 months to a year, right? Get them healthy, strong, big, and then I'll throw them into that main display tank. That way there, again, it gives him time to grow without getting picked on by the other fish, and at the same time get used to basically eating HPD and the other sort of things. So it gives everybody a fair shot at surviving, and ultimately you protect your investment. Now, in our unique look at a quarantine system, we're going over to Mike Paulettes, and what he's done is he thinks he's built a better mousetrap in that normally these systems are totally, we'll call it separated from the main display tank, plumbing especially. But what he's done, right, is he basically used a separate system, but he plumbed it into his main display tank, which when you would think about it is not really a good idea, because now that you're sharing water, now any parasites or anything like that can get back in your main display tank. And sure, you're protecting the fish, for example, or the corals, and giving them a chance to kind of heal themselves, but at the same time you could be spreading other diseases, etc., over into your main display tank. Well, again, in this particular situation, he thinks he's built a better mousetrap, so let's take a look at Mike's tank and his quarantine system and kind of see what he's got going on there.
Today, Michael, we're going to talk a little bit more about my quarantine tank, selecting fish, getting fish acclimated, all the things that cost us a lot of money, and we lose stupid money because we lose fish for stupid reasons.
Okay, no. All that and more on American Reef. Who's your favorite video podcast, Mike?
American Reef, of course.
Now, what are we going to show?
We're going to show a podcast of my quarantine slash acclimation tank,
which is awesome.
Frag tank.
Which is awesome. Okay, go ahead. So, like we had talked before, people would die for the color in that tank.
People would die for the color in that tank, and I didn't plan on it getting that way, but over my travels, I've become a, let's say, obsessive-compulsive collector, for lack of a better term, of rainbow acans. So I've gotten probably 100 frags of different kinds in here, and they've grown amazingly well because I feed them 3 times a week, so that helps a lot. But because I have found that if I don't quarantine slash acclimate fish and corals, they tend not to do as well when I put them in the main tank, I've set this up as my slash quarantine slash frag tank. Now, one of the things, I buy fish anywhere because I'm always looking for odd fish, healthy fish, good fish, just fish that really I want. There's no other way to put it. So I buy fish online, but I also buy fish from the local fish stores here, particularly wet pets. And why I'm pointing that out is in this tank are 2 fish I have tried to get for approximately 6 months, a Maculiceps tang and a healthy powder blue tang. And when I say healthy, you see them all the time. Everyone has them all the time. I have probably, unfortunately, had 6 or 8 powder blues. I never got them fat and healthy. I never had them eating anything like that. But Wet Pets had one in, actually they had 3 in, that they had for over a month, that Big Ed, Brian's dad, did the same kind of acclimation and feeding system that he did with the Moray Shido. As we discussed with the Moray Shido, I never had one that lived until I got the one from Wet Pets. By the same token, I have never had a powder blue tang live for a month, and he's now been in this acclimation tank for a month. He still has the colors he had, he's still fat, he hasn't gotten thin behind the head, and I attribute that to getting him, after Big Ed had spent 3 weeks getting him used to eating. And when I say used to eating, he goes through a variety of foods until he finds one that the fish will eat, gets them eating it, and then he adds a couple things to it, and adds a couple things to it. In this case, he got him started on basically nori and a little bit of other herbivore food. He then went to LRS Reef Frenzy, and finally to PE Mysis. And as I'm going to show you in a minute, these fish now eat like pigs, which I had never gotten them to do before. I had been traveling for the previous 2 weeks, so I would have put them back into the tank earlier, but I'm waiting now. And then in that big tank there are 3 big cardinal fish that are about 4 inches long that are bullies. I'm going to catch those out and get rid of them. So then I'm going to move these Acarai cardinals in there, which I like, as you see from my tank upstairs. I'm also going to move these tangs and this rabbit fish into there. So there's going to be a lot of new fish moving in at once, which one will cut down on the amount of grief and aggravation they get when they're put into this tank. But 2, I already know they're healthy and eating, so that's going to go a long way toward having them be successful. Now, as you notice, there are 2 tangs and a rabbit fish in here, and everyone knows tangs and rabbit fish are ick magnets. They have very thin mucus coat on their body. As a result, they're very prone to getting external parasites. So the question I get asked all the time is, aren't you running a risk having this tank hooked up to your main tank? And for most of the time, when I did this before, I would say yes. Now what I have done is I have the overflow runs into the oxygen reactor underneath, which has a oxygen reduction potential, an ORP of over 600. So as a result, just like in Europe where they use ozone to purify water, kills off bacteria, viruses, and virtually anything in it, any kind of parasites, I'm doing the same thing here. I'm using ozone to purify the water that comes out of here. These fish came in, they showed a tiny little speck of ick, which usually meant everything in both tanks was going to come down with it. I feed them Thera-A with garlic, I feed them garlic-enriched food, and I had them eating, and within 3 days the ick disappeared, and there was never any ick there because, as I said, it runs through the ozone reactor. So it is now my frag / quarantine tank. Realistically, there aren't many more fish. I know it's hard for people to believe that, but there really are only maybe 2 or 3 other fish I want to get to put in here. So they will go in after I get rid of these fish.
I'll take a bet on that.
Yeah, I know, but there's a few odd wrasses, like a Bell's wrasse and a Johnson's wrasse that I'm trying to get, and a couple other things. Once I get those will go in here and then eventually go in there. but realistically, I'm not looking to add 20, 30 more fish. There's probably 30 fish in this tank now, and I'm pretty happy with that. So that's why this is the quarantine tank, and now I'll show you how happy these fish are to eat. This is LRS Reef Frenzy. This is unwashed, so this will show you how clean it is. It doesn't put the cloud of stuff in the water that the PE food does, and you can watch how quickly they go and eat. Hopefully they'll come out. I'm kind of scared because I'm standing right there.
Molly's like,
Yeah, well there you go. Now you see them eating. See, even when I started in the hobby 30 years ago, the rule was don't buy a fish unless it's eating. So once again, that's part of the reason I like to get fish from Wet Pets, in that I always know that they're eating, because Big Ed and Brian will not sell you fish unless they are eating. And then here's PE mysis. This is unwashed. As I showed you before, I always wash this food, but I'm going to get these fish, show you these fish eating it. And whatever they don't eat will go and land on top of the A cans, and they'll eat it.
again, you have the flow turned off.
Yeah, I have the flow turned off so you can watch the food land and you can watch them eat. And there's pretty much nothing makes me as happy as watching newly acquired fish eat, because that's half the battle. And these guys ate from the day I brought them home, actually within 2 hours. You usually don't recommend throwing food in, but I threw food in so that the cardinals would be a little bit more docile with these fish, and the rabbitfish was already here, and they all started eating within 2 hours, which I was pretty impressed with.
So now hold it. You said usually they don't recommend throwing food in when you have a new fish?
Most fish won't eat for the first few hours.
Right.
So if you throw them in their acclimation chamber, all it's going to do is rot. So I generally wait. I feed the other fish when I put them in.
Sure.
But I generally don't feed the new fish until they've been here for like 6 or 8 hours. But in this case, they were eating 2 hours after I put them in the tank, because Ed had acclimated them so well that they were eating everything. And they eat the flake, they eat the pellets, they eat anything that I throw into the tank. And as you can see, there's no skinny head for either of these fish, which is the main thing to look for. And these ocker-eyed cardinal fish have pretty much doubled in size since I got them 6 weeks ago. So. Going to set up a frag tank, and most of us that are hardcore always want to find room for one more thing. You might want to try and set it up as a frag tank / quarantine / acclimation tank. Connect it to your main tank, but do so obviously so that you can protect the fish that are in there from adding any cooties from the new fish that you introduced. And this tank is also easy because it's much easier to target feed. And a lot of these acans that you see in here have been grown from single polyps that basically have been fed and are now 4 and 6 and 8 and 10 and 12 polyps in a relatively short time. And that's why most of these are going to be going into the nano tank. Well, not most of them. Some of them are going to be going into the nano tank.
I thought all of them were. Yeah.
No, there's not enough room in the nano tank.
So the question is Mike's way a smart way or not a smart way? Well, for the new hobbyists, what I would say is, again, learn how to basically keep a coral reef tank first and do things simply. And don't necessarily implement this approach until you kind of get some hours under your belt, till you really understand, again, the dynamics of keeping a coral reef aquarium. With that said, though, what we will do is we'll kind of just keep track of this over the next months and years, and we'll just kind of follow it along. Again, I think it makes perfect sense, and for those of us who have more years on our belts, probably a unique way of trying to basically expand the systems that we've got, minimizing the effort we've got into it, and at the same time protecting the investment. Again, as always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. It's Russ Kickle. I'm at AmericanReef@me.com. So the email is AmericanReef@me.com. And as always, I ask you to give our sponsors a chance to earn your business. Why? Basically because they're honest, good people that deserve a chance to earn that business, right? It's the Tunsies of the world, right? It's the bulk reef supply. It's the premium aquatics. It's the ecosystem, right? Again, it's small companies that have a heart, that have a soul, that again care about you succeeding. And I think that's the kind of companies that we want to promote this business. Again, I'm Russ Kickle, and thanks for watching this episode of American Reef.